Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
You gotta be confident about your Achilles when you
Chase
show
Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got him at
Chris
Hearing
Dowhouse,
about Mr. Pointless in fantasy
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
All right. Welcome into Operation Domination. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate, guys. That's what we're here for. It's week 12. I got to tell you, it's a little weird to do week 12 on a non-Thanksgiving week. I always felt like week 12 fell on Thanksgiving. It's throwing me all off this week. I don't know what it is. My time clocks and everything's just been weird for some reason. But we got a big preview show. Of course, Thanksgiving is next week in week 13. And this week has its bad dilemmas because we got 6 teams on bye, not to mention there's always a sprinkle of injuries. We'll be back with that with Dr. Brian Scott tomorrow at 8 p.m. on the Fantasy Football Advice Network. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and catch Operation Domination Football on your favorite podcast app. I'm with the full crew. Dan Mader here, Chase Thornton, Adam LaRue, Chris D. We got the whole gang in here, and we have some breaking news to talk about. All right, first up, Daniel Jones benched for Tommy Cutlets. Ugh. Like, I thought we were done with this after last year. Like, all right, yes, it was cool. He was a meme character for 3 weeks, and then it finally came back down to reality. Overpass Drew Lock, which I think says a lot about where Drew Lock is, and which is something I think everybody in this group already knew where he was. But I guess the Giants finally got the memo on that one too, and decided, you know what, we're going full tank. And we're throwing Tommy Cutlets out there to hell with everything else. Daniel Jones, we're not chancing paying you any money with you getting hurt because you suck anyway yourself. Guys, all right, let's just take this from a fantasy perspective because I don't want to get into all the hubbub, but I don't even want to think about the fact that we're going to see his agent with gold chains on the sideline again and have to relive this whole fiasco from last year. So let me just break this from a fantasy standpoint. Chase, I'm going to go to you. What's your take here when it comes to Malik Neighbors, when it comes to Tyrone Tracy?
I mean, it's not like they were getting great quarterback play to begin with. They weren't afraid when they had DeVito starting for him last year. They were not afraid to throw the ball. I mean, they weren't covering him up necessarily. So I'm not necessarily worried about Neighbors is still the best receiver on that team. He's going to have to be the number one target. If anything, I mean, if they get improved play at all from Tommy DeVito, then hey, great, good for Malik Neighbors because he was already giving us numbers and targets on this season. Tyrone Tracy, I think Tyrone Tracy is a deal. I think they actually should lean on him probably a little bit more going forward here, especially if they are afraid at all of turning DeVito loose, or if they want to go full tank mode and not try and win and not try and score points like the rest of the league, they can probably keep running Tracy out there. I'm not worried. I'm starting Tyrone Tracy in one of my home leagues this week. I'm still running him out there. He's the best RB2 option I've got right now, which says something about where I'm sitting there. But I'm not worried about Malik Neighbors and Tyrone Tracy, but I definitely don't want to have to be touching anybody else on those teams. Theo Johnson, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt. I mean, they haven't been usable for the most part anyway. Devin Singletary is now completely off the radar, in my opinion. So, but I'm not worried about Tracy or Neighbors going forward. You're going to get the same thing out of them, I think, that you've been getting because that team is not appreciably better or worse with Tommy DeVito at quarterback.
Well, that's a big indication on Daniel Jones. That's going to truly wind up being the case. I think it's a stab in the gut for Malik Neighbor owner, especially for this week. You're going up against Tampa Bay is one of the best matchups you can have for wide receivers, and it's just a little bit of a stab in the gut. Now, I still have Neighbors as a wide receiver 2 heading into this week. Last year, when we had 6 starts out of Tommy Cutlets, we did see Devin Singletary himself be the RB8 overall. So I don't think this is going to affect Tyrone Tracy all that much. If anything, it's going to be more check down passes for him to have to gobble up, and he'll be more of the featured weapon. Darius Slayton, who was the top receiver during that time, was wide receiver 45. So this could be a little bit of a dip. However, Malik Neighbors, very different receiver. Darius Slayton, at least as far as how he's utilized, he is utilized closer to the line of scrimmage, which will play to his benefit. Tommy DeVito only had about 6.77 air yards per attempt last season during his 6 starts there. So you're hoping that he pretty much gets the, I don't know, Chris, the CD Lamb treatment, some end arounds, a lot of short passes just to feed him the ball for the sake of it. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, that's hopeful thinking. This offense hasn't been very creative in getting him the ball. So I think that's something that maybe the coaching change, or I'm sorry, the quarterback change, the coaches will actually coach. But so far, this team not done a whole lot of things that made sense. You got Wendell Robinson, a guy who can be involved in those, jet sweeps actions you're talking about at the end. You got Darius Slayton, as you talked about. They have a lot of different players to kind of utilize in the running game. I don't know if they need more guys touching the ball that way. They need somebody actually can catch the ball. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think, like you said, it's definitely going to not be something a boon this week, and it'll be definitely determined to see moving forward, is his coaching staff going to do a better job putting their quarterback and his team in position to score and succeed, because his team only scoring 15 points a game, Dan. So, I mean, it's not like they have a whole lot more to do, but it can get worse, and let's not get it twisted. We've seen places where it's gotten worse, so it definitely can get worse than what we've seen from Daniel Jones. It'll be interesting.
There's a scary thought for you. All right, so this next piece of breaking news isn't really necessarily fantasy relevant, but I am curious to still get Adam's take here. What did you think about Joe Douglas getting fired?
I mean, look, I think he's a pretty solid drafter. I think his first draft for the Jets was not that great. But after that, I mean, I think he did a pretty solid job, getting the pieces for that defense. And I think, they had the skill position talent this whole time, right? Like Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, some of the other guys. I mean, I at the time, Elijah Moore I'm not the only person who was high on Elijah Moore. I know I certainly was a truther, but I'm not alone there. So I by consensus, that was a well-received pick, right? Point being. Look, I think ultimately, if you get a couple chances to swing at quarterback and miss, that's your time. It doesn't matter if you can draft other positions. So I don't think this is a big surprise. His contract was up at the end of the season. We've already lost the coach. How many coaches do you get a chance to hire? How many quarterbacks do you get a chance to swing at? It sucks because, again, I think you can draft at other positions, but if you don't hit quarterback, it doesn't matter. So,
Dan, can I jump in real quick? Adam, I mean, quarterback's definitely one of the issues. This guy had a good eye for talent. He's just horrible hiring coaching staffs. Agreed. I mean, I think that's basically what it boils down to. All the players he added wound up having coaches who didn't like the players that he was adding to the team or didn't seem to fit. So I think that's been Joe Douglas's biggest issue, is he just did a terrible job when it comes to evaluating and putting, coaches around the players that he was drafting.
Yeah, hell of a scout. The GM part, not necessarily his strong suit, but he's a good talent evaluator, in my opinion.
You can't say they don't have talent. Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, they makes a trade for Devontae Adams, Quinnen Williams, Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed, Michael Carter. I mean, the list goes on. That team's not talented. And I just think it's funny that we're watching Aaron Rodgers get everybody fired around him when he's really the problem. But, whatever you got to do. Shout out in the chat. If you got your questions, go ahead and fire away. But for now, we're going to get into the DFS cocktail hour.
All right, gentlemen. Hey, in honor of what you're going to see as our quarterback wide receiver pairing this week, tonight we are going to be making a Colorado Bulldog. Now, if you're not familiar, people out there, Colorado Bulldog, essentially it's a white Russian with cola added to it. The ratios are a little bit different typically, but the main difference is the cola on top of the white Russian. Now, as a reminder, before we get into this, generally, again, we're always talking about DraftKings classic lineups, cash games, 50-50s, as opposed to, say, GPP or tournament plays here. And we're using DraftKings pricing accordingly. So with that being said, hey, let's get started. There's some big favorites this week if you look at the lines, but there's some favorites in games that don't have necessarily big point totals. So we could see some interesting stat lines and some interesting usage, I think, up and down the board. But like I said, making the Colorado Bulldogs, so you might have guessed, we're going to go with a couple of Denver Broncos right off the bat here. Specifically, we're going to use Bo Nix at 6,300 as our quarterback, and we are going to use his top target, Cortland Sutton, at 5,800 here at wide receiver, okay? Broncos are on the road this week in Vegas. Now, this is the same Vegas team that just allowed Tua Tagovailoa to go for 3 scores and almost 300 passing yards there. Vegas gives up the 8th most points to the quarterback position, and their secondary is kind of banged up after last week. Outside of Max Crosby, they haven't really done a real great job generating much pass rush, despite the fact that they're in the top 10 in the league in blitz percentage. They just don't get home to the quarterback that often. Nix has been surprisingly good for me at running Sean Payton's offense. He's averaging 18.6 DraftKings points per game on the year. He's even better than that over the last month here. So I think he should return pretty good value here on that $6,300 price tag. If you're not so into that, you want to look elsewhere. I actually also really like Kyler Murray a lot this week for value. I think he's undervalued at 6,200, so you can take that for what you want. But we're going to go with Bo Nix. We're going to pair Nix with his top target, Cortland Sutton. Now, we talked about it last week when we talked about the Jonnu Smith play at tight end. Vegas hasn't allowed a ton of points to wide receiver. They've given up a ton at the tight end position, but they haven't really been, all that lucrative from a wide receiver standpoint. But that secondary is banged up, like I said, and I think that lofty ranking they've got against wide receivers is kind of mostly a product of who they've played and when they've played them. They didn't see Puka or Cooper Kupp against the Rams. They caught George Pickens with Justin Fields playing quarterback. Honestly, they've played from behind so much that other teams haven't had to really throw a ton against them. But they did give up 5 touchdowns a couple weeks ago to Joey Burrow and company. So I liked Sutton's usage lately. He's had 38 targets his last 4 games. He's averaging over 20 DraftKings points per game in that 1 month stretch there, despite the fact he's only scored 1 touchdown on that. So we'll pair Nix and Sutton up. Let's go with that. With that, we're going to start our Colorado Bulldog off with our Yeoman vodka here. We're going to do 2 ounces of that. All right. Now, for a Colorado Bulldog, your ratios of liqueurs and cream are going to be basically 1 to 1 to 1. When you're making a White Russian, a lot of times you do 2 to 1 vodka to your Kahlua, your coffee liqueur. But in a Colorado Bulldog, your ratios are going to be 1 to 1 to 1. So we'll be making the same pour for everything here. But we're going to move on and we're going to go to running back. And this week we're loading up at running back on some pretty affordable options here. I mentioned Kyler Murray earlier, but I also like James Conner this week against the Seahawks. He's going to be $6,500 on DraftKings. Now, he's been every bit as good this season as he was last season. And the key for him and for us, he's managed to stay healthy. The Seahawks give up the 11th most points to the opposing running backs. Connor gets usage in both the run and the pass game, so you can still get in on that Murray action that I was talking about a few minutes ago. With Connor. Connor's coming off season best 80 yards on 5 receptions, 5 targets. So we're still getting in on that possibility of that pass game there. Plus, like I said, Seahawks give up a bunch of points to the running back. So we're going to take him at 6,500. We're also going to use Brian Robinson Jr. this week at 5,600. He was able to punch one in against the Eagles on Thursday Night Football there, coming off a couple of missed games due to his injury. But now he's had that mini bye to rest up. Dallas has been horrendous in a lot of ways, but especially against the run, they're allowing the 3rd most points to opponents' running backs there. Washington is a 10.5 point favorite in this one. So listen, I think Robinson is going to get plenty of opportunity to pound away at that Cowboys' atrocious run defense. We'll go with him at 5,600. And then our 3rd running back is tentatively going to be Kareem Hunt for 5,700. Now, I know there's possibility this week that Isaiah Pacheco comes back and returns, but I don't expect them to just dump the entire workload on him fresh out of the blue tent like he's going to be. KC is the week's biggest favorite, and they're playing a Carolina run defense that has given up the most points to the running back position because they've given up the most rush yards per game and the 2nd most rushing scores in the league so far this year. So watch Pacheco's situation. If you're worried about it, you can pivot elsewhere, but I'm willing to roll with Hunt for one more week here. So that's our 3 running backs. Moving on. We're going to look at our 2 cheapest plays of the week here as we pour in, like I said, 2 ounces here of Kahlua. One there and another one. There we go. Now, a lot of people will only make that with 1 ounce each. Again, I like them big, so I'm making it in a pint glass here. But we're going to go to our 2 cheapest plays of the week here, our tight end and our DST. Now, at tight end, we're going to go back to that Washington-Dallas game where we're playing Brian Robinson, and we're going to play Zach Ertz for 3,800. He's kind of middle of the pack right now, tight end price-wise. He's had a nice floor all year for production. Dallas isn't terrible against tight ends, but they're not great either. And I think Ertz is going to be able to find some openings in that secondary along with everybody else. He should see plus targets, and I think he stands as good a chance as anybody of finding himself in the end zone. So we'll take him there. As for our DST, we're going to go back to the Denver game, and we're going to take the Broncos against the Raiders for 3,200. They are the top-ranked defense this week, pretty much consensus across the board, but they're only priced the 7th highest for DraftKings. And they're facing the Las Vegas Raiders, who have been the second worst team all year against opposing DSTs. They're giving up a ton of points to them. We're going to jump on that. So that's going to leave us then with 2 wide receiver slots to fill. That's going to be there we are. We're back. That's going to be our cream that we're going to add to our cocktail here. And I use actual cream. I don't use, some people use milk. I like to use, if you've watched The Big Lebowski and he makes his White Russians with milk. No, I like cream because I like the texture that it gives, and I like the flavor that it gives it better. But we've got 2 wide receiver slots to fill. We've got a lot of cash to be able to spend here, gentlemen. Almost everybody is available to us on the board right now at this point because of how much money we have left. We just have to decide how to split up the over $13,000 we've got remaining here on DraftKings. So we're going to go around the horn here. I'll take suggestions for who we want to take for our last 2 wide receivers. We'll go with one. We'll make a decision, and then based on the money we've got left, we can go with our second one. But Dan, let me start with you. Who do you like at wide receiver this week in DFS that we can plug into a lineup here?
This week, so it's funny because this week is the week where I want all the wide receivers playing on Monday night and not necessarily playing here on Sunday. So the DFS was actually kind of a difficult matchup for me this week. I'm trying to pull up my lineup that I had because I had a couple of creative ones. I went with Noah Brown was a sleeper, but I also like Terry McLaurin this particular week. Cortland Sutton's been a big target monster for this week, but DeAndre Hopkins is sitting at a nice price range going against Carolina Panthers. So something along those lines. Another one, though, Juwan Jennings is still underpriced. Going up against Green Bay Packers, he's been the number 1 wide receiver there for the San Francisco 49ers. So I think I would go somewhere between a DeAndre Hopkins and a Juwan Jennings.
Okay, Juwan Jennings there at 5,600, DeAndre Hopkins at 5,400. That would leave us a ton of money left over for our last wide receiver there. Chris, let's go to you. Do you have anybody you like this week, a top-ranked wide receiver that you'd like to see plugged into this lineup here?
Well, necessarily a top-ranked guy, but a good value for me, Chase, was Calvin Ridley this week. A guy who's been kind of featured as a receiver 1 for the Titans offense, taking on a Texans defense that doesn't necessarily the greatest in the secondary. They do get turnovers, but they do give up yardage. So I think it's a game where you have a valuable guy who could use receiver 1 numbers in a game where they're probably going to trail. So I think Calvin Ridley is a guy that I like as a possible DFS option at receiver.
Okay, he's right there in that same kind of price range that we were looking at with Hopkins and Juwan Jennings at 5,700 for Calvin Ridley. So $100 more than Jennings, $300 more than DeAndre Hopkins. So Adam, we'll go to you. Who are you liking this week at wide receiver there that we could plug into our lineup here?
Yeah, the other shout out I'll throw is I think the Colts Detroit game has one of the higher over-unders of the weekend in general, let alone on Sunday. I think on Sunday it is the highest. I'm not sure if it's the highest on the weekend. So I think there's a lot of guys in that game that you could look at. Jameson is one, obviously a nice DFS pick with his big plays. Alec Pierce in a similar vein. Josh Downs maybe a little bit more consistent. But I think that's a game that I would want to target or at least consider targeting.
All right. So for the most part, we threw guys out there that are pretty mid-range in terms of their prices with that 5,700, 5,900 and that. If we want to go completely, to the moon in terms of spending our money, we could spend Amon-Ra St. Brown for 8,300 and we would still have $4,800 left over that we could spend on that wide receiver position, which puts us down around the Tyler Lockett, Rome Odunze, Ricky Pearsall range there. But Jameson Williams, another possibility that you had talked about there. He's only 6,000. If we plug him in, that opens us up for our last slot. So let's take that. Let's go ahead there because I like that. I agree with what you said there that, yeah, it's the highest point total of the weekend. It's tied right now, or at least when I looked, it was tied with Baltimore and the Chargers. But like we said, that's the Monday night game. They're not available to us right now. But if we want to plug in Mr. Jameson Williams there. He's coming off the board at $6,000, and that leaves us with $7,100 left, which puts us now in range to take guys like Dan had brought up, Terry McLaurin. We've already got, reminder, 2 Redskins in our lineup, but we're looking at Redskins. Yeah, come on, that's a faux pas. Commanders. Yeah, sometimes the old guys have a hard time making that switch. Wah, wah. But no, we do have 2 Washington Commanders in our lineup already with Brian Robinson and Zach Ertz, but we would have Terry McLaurin available to us at that price. Mike Evans, the returning Mike Evans off of injury against the Giants secondary. He would be an option there at 7,000. DK Metcalf in that Arizona-Seattle game. If we're, if you're playing off against Murray, we would have that to be played back against. Deebo Samuel at 6,500. They're all available to us. So we'll go reverse order this time. Adam, out of that lineup there, Evans, Mike Evans, Terry McLaurin, DK Metcalf, Deebo. Is there anybody out of that strikes you that you'd want to throw in that lineup?
Well, for me, it's tough between Terry and DK. Those are the 2 that definitely jump out the most to me. I think I have a ever so slight lean towards Terry, but both those guys are definitely very intriguing for me.
Okay. Chris, you got a favorite out of Mike Evans, Terry McLaurin, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel?
I'm going to lean a little bit more towards DK Metcalf for this one, just because I don't want to have too many Commanders on our team. That we have the tight end, we got the running back. As you talked about, this game could be a running up score, so I don't know how much they have to get the McLaurin involved. Hopefully they do, but I think this is the game where you see DK get involved in Arizona's game, so I like DK as that price range.
Okay, Dan, let's hear it.
Yeah, it's funny. I have Terry McLaurin ranked 7, DK Metcalf ranked 8, and Mike Evans ranked 9. Am my rankings going into week? So I would favor Terry McLaurin there. But to Chris's point, because we have so many Commanders, we do need lineup versatility here a little bit. So I actually say Mike Evans. I think he'd be more of a contrarian play, being he's coming off the injury. Most people wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable going that direction. But this is a great match against the Giants. I'm actually talking about Mike Evans a little bit later.
Yeah, I like Mike Evans in that one too. He would be the most expensive of those options, but like I said, that still saves us $100 that we could go back, and if we wanted to upgrade, maybe if you're not big on Ertz at tight end, or you want to go a different running back with Hunt, it would open up your options there as well. So I'm going to plug in Mike Evans there. I'm going to agree with you. We'll put Mike Evans in. So that gives us a lineup, ladies and gentlemen, as we pour a little bit of Coke to flavor on top of this Colorado Bulldog, and pour it slow because it will foam up on you if you do it too quickly. When that Coke hits that creamer, it's going to fizz up and foam up, and it could top over your glass. So be careful there. But that gives us a lineup here of Bo Nix at quarterback. We're going to go James Conner, Brian Robinson, and Kareem Hunt tentatively for 3 running backs. Our 3 receivers would be Cortland Sutton, Mike Evans, and Jameson Williams. Our tight end is Zach Ertz. And our DST for the week is the Broncos against the Raiders. Like I said, Colorado Bulldog, I like it there. This is one of my favorite, just kind of dinking around at home drinks to make. You can stir that up a little bit if you don't want it quite so layered looking. But enjoy that. There you have it.
All right. Well, after that delicious drink, we have a few questions we need to get to. I have been answering them in the chat, but I want to get your guys' opinion on a few of these real quick. So we have Brian Nisco, 22, come in. He was asking, should I trade Alvin Kamara, Kareem Hunt, and T. Higgins for Amon-Ra St. Brown, James Conner, and Wan'Dale Robinson? Chris, would you do that deal if you were Brian?
I was at first a little bit interested with the St. Brown, but then I looked at it. I don't mind getting rid of Hunt, but I don't want to give up Kamara, so I'm going to X that deal.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. You're basically swapping an RB1 for a wide receiver 1. And look, the Lions have 2 things that are kind of negative for the wide receivers. I mean, they've been a great team, but Jared Goff doesn't drop back to pass all that much. And they don't have a great schedule for wide receivers coming up. It might just be a heavy run over the next few weeks. We had another one in here I wanted to get to. Let's get to Kay. He wanted to say, should he trade away Pickens for James Cook at a PPR? He has some receivers like Jamar Chase and Ladd McConkey and Marvin Harrison, but he also has Josh Jacobs and Chase Brown and Najee already. So, Adam, would you do this deal? Would you swap Pickens for James Cook?
To me personally, I don't think it's worth it. I think if you feel like you want more depth at running back, and I definitely get it, the Najee schedule is tough coming up, although I do think this is the time of year for him to improve. And he's had a really good stretch this season. I know he's been away from that for a couple weeks, but I definitely get you being interested in a running back. I would just look elsewhere personally.
All right. And Chase, we had Arturo come in, trade Justin Jefferson for Lamar Jackson and JSN. Would you do that deal, assuming this is a one quarterback league?
It's tough because I like JSN. I'm a JSN guy, and he's been coming on lately. And Lamar obviously is Lamar at quarterback. I don't know what else you've got for quarterback, but we're getting to that time of year where you need to have a stacked lineup and a loaded lineup every single week. And remember, you're going to be missing Lamar Jackson week 14. You're not going to have him on your roster because he's on the second half of Bimageddon there, which in some cases is week 1 of the playoffs for some people. So I think, I like what JJ's schedule looks like the rest of the way as well. He's just too big a gun for me to give up like that. I think you can find, depending on what you're looking at quarterback, you probably are still able to find some points there, at least to fill in. You're going to have to fill in for a week anyway, even if you have Lamar. So I think I would hold pat on that one and unfortunately have to pass my guy up JSN, but keep Justin Jefferson.
I tend to agree. All right, it's time for domination defense of the week.
All right, so we talked about some different games, Dan, and one of the games that we're going to talk about is the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Carolina Panthers. Look, I am not worried about Bryce Young. I think he threw for $120 2 weeks ago and then $150 against the Giants. I don't know if he's going to let the scoreboard versus the Chiefs. Chuba Hubbard's a very good running back, but once you stop the Carolina running attack, they have very little else they can do. This Kansas City defense is going to have some, a little anger takeout from this past week. It was Buffalo game, which wasn't able to run the ball as well either. I think this is going to be a buzzsaw that the Carolina Panthers are going to run into. I love the Kansas City's defense.
Chris, hold on. We're losing, at least on my end anyway. Completely lost your audio there for a second.
Oh,
hey, heard that?
Did you get any of it?
We got you now. Barely. Started
just the end. Yeah, the ending of your spiel there about how they were going to have some anger to take out.
So my dominating defense was the Kansas City Chiefs, and I'm going to take on the Carolina Panthers. As I talked about, we have Bryce Young, the one was $150, $120 the week before that. I'm not worried about him being able to do a whole lot. Chuba Hubbard's been a great running back, but this Kansas City running defense is very good. They're going to have a lot of anger, as Chase talked about. You guys heard me before talking about taking it out on this Carolina Panthers team. I think this Chiefs team is going to be a buzzsaw this week. I think this they're going to have a defensive touchdown opportunity. At least turnovers is going to be there in sacks. I like Kansas City's defense to dominate defense versus the Carolina Panthers this week.
You find me offensive. I find you offensive for finding me offensive.
Dan, it's kind of funny that I'm talking about Bryce Young throwing for $150, $120. He's getting back on track, and he's like getting, might even be stable now.
Improved. He's greatly improved. What he's talking about?
He's greatly improved. They won 2 games in a row. In the meantime, we're watching somebody else who's throwing about $150 a game, and that's Aaron Rodgers, who seems to be on the opposite side where people are waiting for counting the days down that he's going to be possibly out of there. Rumors jumped or leaked out this past week talking about that Woody Johnson wanted Aaron Rodgers benched after that Broncos game. So before Robert Saleh got the boot, there was already talk about Woody Johnson getting tired of Aaron Rodgers holding back this team, which he definitely is. Go ahead.
Let me cut it real fast. How much of that you think is Woody Johnson trying to save his public relations image right now? Because I don't buy it. Like, you're the driving force behind getting Aaron Rodgers in the first place. I don't buy for 1 second when that early in the season he was like, you going to coach? I'm like, yeah, you should guys go Tyrod Taylor. I don't buy for a minute out of Woody Johnson.
I personally do. Woody Johnson usually shoot from the hip guy that he's not usually happy for people.
We know that.
And he definitely doesn't necessarily a big fan of everything that was going down the Jets. And I think he expected them to be way better than they were. And he thought that they were supposed to, not be able to score 13 points versus the Denver Broncos. But I digress. But what I wanted to get to is situations like this that are popping up where we see guys like another New York situation he's talked about, Danny Dimes getting benched for the rest of the season so that we can pay Tommy DeVito, and we don't want to get Danny Dimes hurt. We have other coaches that are going to be in the hot seat. Eberflus, for example, go down the lines, different coaching staffs that are going to be kind of coaching for their jobs, McCarthy, etc. With the situations that are occurring, how does it kind of impact us as the fantasy world? And I wanted to kind of get each of your takes onto this. So Dan, we're going to start with you. When it comes to redraft, with all these kind of looming different things about coaching staff changes and regimes and GMs being fired, does it impact how you kind of plan for your redraft teams moving forward?
I mean, coaching to some degree, right? GMs no. GMs has no effect on what we're going to do this season for redraft purposes.
Real quick, for that part, I mean, like quarterback changes, things like you're seeing for like the New York situation, possibly where they might bench people or situations.
Sure. That absolutely, it changes everything. I mean, look, we talk about this week alone. Like Malik Neighbors would have been easily in my top 8 this week if Daniel Jones was still the quarterback against the Tampa Bay Bucks, because it's Tommy DeVito, and we've seen him play really bad football, and we're not sure exactly where to get. The Giants' offensive line is completely horrible. DeVito was especially bad under pressure last season. We don't know if Malik Neighbors is going to be able to reach his ceiling. We don't know how low his floor might wind up being even in a matchup like this, which is why I had to rank him as a wide receiver too. So absolutely, it affects a ton of things right now. It's seemingly getting Dennis Allen out of the way has had a positive effect on the Saints offense. Not that Dennis Allen had anything to do with the defense, but just an overall lighting philosophy, players playing fun more loosely as a result to that, because there's nothing to lose now at this point. It absolutely affects things on a weekly basis. That's hard to quantify. I mean, the Tommy DeVito thing's easier to quantify because we had data for that. When they do coaching changes, it's harder to quantify in a model situation, but we do have to weight expectations to be primarily more cautious than optimistic usually in those situations.
Going to you, Adam, for Dynasty, I'm sure it has some impact, but what do you see kind of the impact in Dynasty? How long do you kind of wait for these scenarios to kind of play out? Or do you, maybe jump the gun in some situations where you're, hey, I see some things coming down the road where some guy's going to get benched, or there might be situations where they want to see the young guys. So what do you think about that when it comes to Dynasty?
I mean, there's exceptions to this. I personally in Dynasty just kind of try to keep the most talented guys, right? Like ultimately I just try to play talent that eventually that's going to work itself out. There's going to be, weeks where, less talented guy plays, maybe, to your point, like getting benched for someone younger, what have you. But more often than not, the locker room doesn't seem to let that fly. I mean, we saw it, Giants topical. We saw that with Eli Manning and the Geno Smith debacle, right? You got benched for 1 week. Everyone was like, yeah, this is stupid. We went right back, and that's not to say that Eli was so much better than Geno Smith. Clearly, Geno's better right now, but point being, the locker room, regardless of the coaching situation, GM, whatever, wants to see the more talented guy play. So normally, the most talented guy plays. So I just try to err towards that and not worry about the noise. There's certain instances where that gets tested. The Jets could certainly be one, but more often than not, I think that's how it plays out.
Now, Chase, when it comes to DFS, does that kind of impact you? Look for bumps sometimes, like Dan talked about New Orleans changing, and there was a bump. MVS was like the play to have, or there's just things that you're looking for that maybe that some of these guys that Adam talked about, some of the younger guys, or even some of the guys that I talk about, older guys who, if I'm a CeeDee Lamb, for example, where I'm questionable the neck and leg, maybe I might make it through the game, maybe I don't. So do I, take that chance in DFS lineups? How does it kind of impact DFS? In your mind, Chief?
Well, the nice thing about DFS is, unlike even in redraft, you don't have to worry about trying to offload a guy if he's in an underperforming situation. You just don't play him. And therein lies, I think, how you approach DFS anyway, regardless of whether a coach is on the hot seat. If a coach is on the hot seat, or if a quarterback's on the hot seat for that matter, even if we want to extend it there, they're on the hot seat for a reason, and that reason is they haven't been the team has not been performing up to snuff. And if the team hasn't been performing up to snuff, you're typically not looking too hard at a lot of those guys anyway in DFS, because you want guys who are performing or who have a chance to perform. We look at Dallas and how horrendous they've been all season. McCarthy's seat, yeah, it's been getting progressively warmer and warmer and warmer. Now they're missing Dak Prescott, and that's honestly plays a big part in why they're performing where they're at. But we also know that they were all in, except for the fact that they didn't bring in a all in running back. Listen, if a guy is on a hot seat, they haven't performed, I probably don't want part of his offense. Mike McCarthy runs that offense. He's on the hot seat. They have not been performing, so I haven't been looking hard at Cowboys anyway. You want to talk about, the Saints. Saints started out the year awesome. Early in the year when they were playing, they were hanging 50 on teams. You wanted parts of that, but as they got progressively worse and it fell off the cliff in a hurry, it seemed like you haven't been looking at them as much. Even with the injuries to their receivers, you haven't been looking at them as much outside of uber talents like Alvin Kamara. So in DFS, you're always looking at the most immediate, what's happening in the here and now, what could happen for this week. And if a team's been underperforming such that their coach is on the hot seat, that's definitely going to play into your thinking. So coaches, quarterbacks on the hot seat. If they end up benching Rodgers for whatever reason, if they did end up benching Rodgers in New York, that would definitely impact the value of Devontae Adams, of Garrett Wilson moving forward. So you're paying attention to it, but the writing is almost on the wall, kind of going into it all the way through, because that team probably hasn't been performing as well anyway. So you probably haven't been looking at them.
Well, so I think it's something I just wanted to kind of get everybody's perspective on, because I do think it's something that impacts, impacts Dynasty as well, but it impacts fantasy football overall. And I think that sometimes it's, kind of hard to always talk about things in retrospect, especially when it comes to fantasy, because you want to be ahead of the curve. You want to have the players already. You want to know what to kind of move on from, versus everybody reacts and like, oh yeah, well they benched so-and-so, now it all sucks and it's going downhill. You should have unloaded so-and-so 2 weeks ago. So I think this is something that we do want to keep an eye on, especially as trade deadlines start approaching in drafts, kind of decide where you kind of are and what you want to move and what you want to do. Speaking of things and making moves, next part I want to talk to is our showdown. Last week we had a little receiver showdown where we had similar players. We talked about redraft, talked about Dynasty, we talked about DFS, and kind of what their impact are as guys that we liked a little bit more or less. So I'm the showdown, the quarterback this week. And I'm going to start off with the number 2 pick last year and number 1 pick this year, Caleb Williams and CJ Stroud. We're going to start off with you, Adam, dynasty-wise. CJ Stroud, Caleb Williams, which guy do I have higher? Which one do I want to have for dynasty right now?
Yeah, for me, it's CJ Stroud, and it sucks because I was really big on Caleb coming in. But look, I've seen it from Stroud, and I'm not as worried about a guy who I've seen it at the professional level, and we're just having a blip of poor performances versus look, I haven't consistently seen it from Caleb. I sure think he's capable of it. If I had him in Dynasty, I would not be selling. If someone's panic selling, I'm certainly there to buy. But between these two guys, I'd just rather have Stroud.
All right, Dan, how about yourself when it comes to redraft for the rest of the year? Who you if you have to have an extra quarterback on your roster, Caleb Williams or CJ Stroud is the guy that you like for the upside possibly?
It's Stroud, hands down. He's got first of all, Chicago has a terrible schedule for quarterbacks moving forward. And I did like what we saw with Thomas Brown taking over. Caleb Williams was quicker to get the ball out of his hands, quicker to make the decision to pull it down and run a little bit more. We always know that running can be a little bit of a cheat code, but I don't expect him to start running like Lamar Jackson, or Kyler Murray, or Jaden Daniels anytime soon. You get Nico back finally this past week. I expect that offensive passing attack to improve from what we have seen. And I think CJ Stroud's going to start trending towards more being a high-end QB2, low-end QB1 in some of these matchups that he should have coming up and going all the way into the playoffs. And I'm trying to pull up the exact games. I have the rank in front of me where it's 19th, but he's about tied in the middle of the pack as far as the grades go. But you have Tennessee Titans this week. This is not a great matchup this week. But then you have Jacksonville. You have a Miami matchup there. Kansas City's a little rough, but then you get Baltimore in the championship game. That alone makes you want to go CJ Stroud here.
All right. So Joe Mixon can't score all the touchdowns, Dan says.
Not always playing Dallas. That's the key point.
How about you, Chase? I'm trying to spend down. I'm looking for a value. Do you like CJ Stroud or Caleb Williams usually for your DFS play if you're looking for upside?
Yeah, I had a lot of the same notes actually that Dan just brought up for redraft here. It's Stroud rest of the season. I think actually in Dynasty it's a little closer. Williams is real close, I think, in Dynasty compared to Stroud. I do like Stroud better in just about every format, though, at the moment. He does have a better rest of the season schedule. Yeah, he's got KC, who gives up, I think, 10th or 11th most points to opposing quarterbacks there in week 16. Championship week 17, like Dan said, he's got Baltimore. That's a cake matchup for opposing quarterbacks. And yeah, in terms of Caleb Williams, he's got to face Minnesota, Detroit, and Seattle from weeks 15 through 17. That's not an easier, not a better schedule as far as that goes. Offensive line wise, neither one of these guys has had great offensive line play, so that's not necessarily going to play into anything that you're thinking about here. But it is Stroud for the rest of the season. I like the weapons he's got. You mentioned Collins coming back. I think that will give a big boost to that entire team. Joe Mixon's been playing lights out. We saw some nice things, I think, last week out of the Bears under Thomas Brown. I think we saw a different direction they might want to go. It was actually Caleb Williams' best rushing performance of the year so far. Looked like they turned him loose maybe a little bit more that way. But I need to see a little bit more from that under Thomas Brown to really see how they're going to use him. But based on the matchups they have coming up and the fact that, yeah, they're basically trying to not necessarily install a new scheme, but they are switching gears right here in the middle of the season. It's probably CJ Stroud week in and week out from here on out if you're looking for that quarterback play and looking for a budget play.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see if Caleb continues to use the legs, 70 yards rushing. If you get a touchdown or two, all of a sudden you're talking about one of the top-tier quarterbacks last week. Moving on for guys who were top-tier quarterbacks, but not recently, that was Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels has kind of had some of the shine wear off while Anthony Richardson was everybody's guy that going into the season, got benched, and now back, had a great game versus Jets last week, almost 30 points for in fantasy last week. So I'm going to start with you, Dan. For the rest of the season, are we going to run Anthony Richardson or Jaden Daniels?
Jaden Daniels is going to get healthy. Okay. And I think it's been a little bit banged up. He's got a great matchup this week against Dallas, first and foremost. And I just trust Jaden Daniels more. I know Anthony Richardson ran, and I even made a note of this on social media that, look, Shane Steichen finally let the guy run near the goal line. I mean, that's where his fantasy value was supposed to come from when we were talking about him in the offseason. Does that continue? I don't know. I don't know if sitting out 2 weeks all of a sudden made all the improvement in the world that we needed to see. He certainly played better this past week. I don't want to take that from him. And he does have a better schedule than Jaden Daniels does the rest of the way. But Jaden Daniels is a more competent offense where he can do it with his legs and his arms. I don't trust Richardson to be consistent week to week because we've just seen that so often throughout his career where he'll have a decent game and then come out and throw 5 picks the next week and throw 10 completions. So for me, stabilizing the ship is Jaden Daniels. But really, the answer is really it's going to be matchup dependent week to week for both these guys.
So speaking week to week, I'll go to Chase. Chase, what are you looking at DFS wise for these guys? Do you like one more than the other, or are you kind of in line with Dan?
Yeah, I'm in line with Dan in that. Yeah, this is a closer call in terms of being matchup based than the Stroud Williams debate was. But because we've seen Anthony Richardson, we have seen him from a fantasy perspective. We've seen him have spike weeks before, but I think that week in, week out, yes, Jaden Daniels, I feel like we've already seen, what they want in their quarterback. And I think we've already seen that he can deliver that for them. And Anthony Richardson, I haven't seen necessarily the growth between last year and this year, especially under an offensive minded coach like Shane Steichen. I haven't seen that growth that I would want to see out of my, top, franchise quarterback pick. He's still, Jaden Daniels is averaging almost 70% completion percentage this year. Anthony Richardson has hit over 70% in a game once this year, and that was when he was 3 of 4 against Pittsburgh in week 4 before he got knocked out with the injury. So otherwise, he's basically throwing at about a 50% clip. That doesn't cut it in the NFL, even if you've got legs. And the problem is, like we said, Anthony Richardson hadn't necessarily even shown his legs all that often this year. I like Jaden Daniels more. I have more confidence in Jaden Daniels, even though he's the younger matchup. I think that he has shown he's a better passer. I think he's better suited to use the other weapons around him. He doesn't have to rely on those legs to be able to get some points. I think he can pass his way to points as well. So I'm probably more apt to be able to play Jaden Daniels going forward. But if Richardson gets the right matchup on the right week and he's the right price, it's a lot closer question to me than the Stroud Williams was.
Well, let me push back on that real quick from a DFS perspective, because Jaden Daniels, like this week, he's had a horrible month stretch, yet he's still $7,000. And I don't disagree with it because he's playing against Dallas. The ceiling could be back there. And for him to have a nice bounce back week and everybody doubting this week, I think there's going to be a little extra motivation to tank. But in comparison, Anthony Richardson's 5,600. Because of his bench and because of how he's played this season, I think there's a real chance Richardson's going to be pretty cheap here the rest of the way unless he goes off like Donkey Kong. DFS standpoint, I am going to probably look at Richardson more often than the rest of the season than I'm going to look at Jaden Daniels. I just kind of wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, I might look at him. I don't necessarily know that I will play him over Daniels as much, but your point stands. Yeah, that because of what we've seen out of him, he'll most likely be cheaper, but it's a risk reward thing as well with him. So.
Speaking of risk reward, Adam, when it comes to Dynasty, that's the ultimate risk reward. Anthony Richardson was probably the guy people were selling, that I want to buy back. Jaden was the guy that everybody was super high on. But as we know, a lot of times Kingsbury's offenses go stale the second half of the season. We're about that time for Kingsbury's offenses to start going. But is that going to impact how you look with Dynasty when it comes to Jaden Daniels and when it comes to Anthony Richardson moving forward?
Impacted, sure, but ultimately I'm still going Jaden Daniels. Look, I think no matter how, to be honest, Jaden ends this season, and I don't think it's going to completely implode. Maybe I wouldn't be shocked, let's say, if Richardson outscored him from today until the end of the season. I think that Jaden will outscore him, but I wouldn't be shocked, right? But at the end of the day in Dynasty, immediately after the season, sure, maybe Richardson's value is a little bit higher. Maybe. Doubt it, but maybe. Realistically, come April, people are going to be just remember the season as a cumulative, which is going to weigh in the first half of the season where it was Jaden by a country mile. And it's not going to be, there's nothing Richardson can do to make up that ground. There just simply isn't anything that he can do. With as much hype as he came to the league with his, size and arm and the whole thing, and having good matchups the rest of the way and potential to bolster.
He's younger than Jaden Daniels, but
agreed. I just think, look, the hype that Jaden built more recently at the beginning of this season, Richardson would have to make up a ton of ground. I just don't see it, even if Jaden flounders. I think that, again, maybe it's a little bit weird at the end of the season if Richardson goes on a run and Jaden stays flat, but come off season, like mid off season, I think Jaden's value is going to be a lot better. Richardson's been benched once. Jaden is still a guy that people are going to look back on and say he had a very successful rookie season, almost regardless of what he does the rest of the way.
All right, and my last one, Dan, we're going to start off with you. We've seen these different quarterbacks, especially these rookie quarterbacks, kind of been playing well. We talked about some of the guys this, earlier on, but now we'll talk about Drake May and Bo Nichols. Drake May is a guy who's been coming on strong as of late, using his legs, but able to have a touchdown or two per game. A guy that New England's basically built their offense around. And you have Bo Nix, a guy who's been somebody people have been kind of sniffing at fantasy as a guy who's been a top 10 quarterback over the last few weeks. Yeah, a great game last week. I think his second or third game has 3 or 4 touchdown passes in a game. So when it comes to the rest of the season, are you going with the guy who's coming on strong, the guy who's kind of done it, Dan, Bo Nix, or Drake May?
Yeah, I really wish I had the dynasty part of this because I would feel a lot better answering this question. But from a redraft standpoint, going into this thing, it's got to be Bo Nix. First of all, he has the best schedule of any quarterback the rest of the way. I mean, he's got Raiders this week, right? Browns, who are imploding on defense the following week. He's got a bye week for teams. So does Drake May anyway. And then you got the Colts, the Chargers, the Bengals. The only defense in that mix you're worried about is the Chargers, and he's using a blend of his legs, and Sean Payton is making the reads very simple for him where he doesn't have to think too much, and he's getting one read out to whoever the guy is for that week, and the offense is staying ahead of the chains. In Drake May's case, he also has a decent schedule, and he's been using his legs too. But the difference is he just doesn't have the weaponry. Like, he doesn't have the wide receiver. He doesn't have a Cortland Sutton. Like, it's so much on him to make every little play. And when teams, you're seeing them doing it now, they're just keying in on Drake May and just limiting the offense, limiting the numbers of what he can do. He's doing a lot to try to keep him in games. From a fantasy perspective, he's not putting up ghastly numbers. Right now, Bo Nix is, and I don't see it stopping until potentially the Chargers game week 16 right now. So it'd have to be Bo Nix.
So little Jordan Humphreys, coming through for Denver Broncos, and the New England Patriots don't have it. What do you see, Chase, from week to week when it comes to Bo Nix and Drake May that you're looking at for DFS?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Nix is going to cost more than May will, but yeah, for me, the production you're going to get out of Nix is probably better just week in and week out. May's best fantasy performance to this point was back against Jacksonville, and I think it was week 7. He had like 20.8 fantasy points. Nix has passed that up like five, 6 times already this season. Nix, you just look at their situation. Dan kind of alluded to it here, but their weaponry, there is no one on that Patriots team that can hold a candle to Cortland Sutton in terms of the top weapon that the guy has to throw to. But I think yeah, no, I know. I'm not worried about Kendrick Bourne. Maybe at some point, Jalen Polk or Javon Baker become that guy. They were drafted to hopefully become that guy, but right now there is no one on that team that can touch the top weaponry that Bo Nix has, and even his lesser weapons, like we laughed a little bit about little George Humphrey or Devon Vele. He's even shown that he's got some chemistry with those guys, and he can find them and he can work with them. He's also shown that, yeah, he can run, and just the situation around them completely. PFF right now has Denver ranked as the number 2 offensive line in all of football. They have the New England Patriots ranked at number 32, dead last in the entire league. Drake May does not have a great team around him right now. They don't have the infrastructure in place for him to truly show what he's fully capable of. I like the coaching situation better in terms of Sean Payton and Joe Lombardi working in the way that they've worked with Bo Nix compared to Gerard Mayo and Alex Van Pelt up in New England. I need to see more organizationally from New England before I'm fully comfortable with May. That said, again, he will be cheap, and if you find a matchup that you like him in, you can use that to your advantage and save yourself some money elsewhere. But I think week in, week out, Nix is probably the better production option.
All right, Adam. So when it comes to Dynasty, having that Austin Hooper versus having a great Dolchich can make a major difference for both these guys. No, I joke, but when it looks at Dynasty, these guys, what are you thinking when it comes to Drake May, Bo Nix? Which one are you valuing more?
Look, I don't think it's a secret that I'm going to say Drake May as far as Dynasty. I think, we've had the conversation going in about my thoughts about Drake May and about Bo Nix. We've had that conversation. What I will say, and I want to give Bo Nix credit before I talk about Drake May, is I do think that he's improved a lot upon his long-term Dynasty aspects this season. I think he's done some things, pushed the ball down the field, namely more than I expected to, especially as a rookie. So I want to give him at least a little bit of credit. He's used his legs really well as well. I don't want to completely kill off the idea that there could be something there. I'm curious about the upside from a long-term perspective. But could he be a very solid quarterback, too, for a number of years? Sure. I don't want to kill off that idea. So I want to give Bo Nix that credit. Having said that, I think the long-term plan of the Patriots actually looks to me very good. I'm kind of impressed with this organization. I'll admit, first month this season when they were coaching with Jacoby Brissett, I was a little concerned, both immediate and also kind of where things were going. But as the season has kind of progressed, I think how the offense is operating is a lot smarter than I expected. I think Demario Douglas is a real NFL player. I know that they don't have a whole lot of those yet, but I actually do trust this regime to go find more of them. I think that overall this past class has been pretty solid. And I think that they have a foundation in regards to both money and draft capital to continue acquiring guys who are quality. This is a team that, look, if you go do a mock draft yourself in like the PFF mock draft simulator, you read mock drafts, like I think that they are like, it's not crazy that people are constantly mocking them, Tedero and McMillan. I think the math makes sense where they should land on the board. I think that would be a good pick for them, and that suddenly like that chip falls there, and suddenly we're having a much different conversation about Drake May or even some of the top offensive linemen in this class. I know that there's some guys where the people don't necessarily love at tackle, but there's some top offensive line players, no doubt, wherever they play. So look, I think this Patriots team is one that I wouldn't be shocked if they improve in a hurry. I think being my overall point, which Drake May, he already looks great now as a playmaker. I think he's using his legs well. I think he's throwing down the field very well, a lot further along than I would have expected, and I liked him a lot coming in. So yeah, super stoked on Drake May, and I think he could be a rock star next year.
So real quick, I think that Bo Nichols is definitely having a great season, but it reminds me so much of Daniel Dimes in his rookie year. It's like it's spitting image of it. The offensive line's having great protection. They're getting away with certain calls that aren't going to continue to be the same things they're going to do with passing attack. And Dan, I know you looked at the schedule, and I know you said Bo Nix has a decent schedule, but I don't believe that they play the NFC South anymore the rest of the season. So that seems to be where they go ballistic at. And Sean Payton owns the NFC South, which he head coaches the Saints. They destroyed all those teams that they played in that division. So that's basically where I think Bo Nix has had some of the bigger games. And Adam, as you alluded to, I think Drake May is one of the youngest quarterbacks, I believe, in the league still. What he's showing right now is tremendous. I think the upside's there. I like what Bo Nix has done this year. I give a lot of credit to overall for Denver being able to pull out games. But I think even this season, Dan, I talked about, I think you're on some, the schedule is some part of it. But I think when you're going to see guys throwing in snow and cold weather, you're going to see that's going to affect some of this stuff too. I like Drake May throwing more as the season progresses than like Bo Nix. But I think all of you make great points. And talking about different guys in Dynasty, let's go to Adam.
Well, just real quick on that. Bo Nix was QB8 against the Raiders last time he played around. He gets to play him again this week, and he played in Oregon. So I don't know if the cold weather is going to affect him that much, but I don't disagree that this is spitting an image of Daniel Jones. But with that, yes, we have to go to Dynasty Temperature Check.
Hot air, so hot in here.
Thank you. Yeah, let's keep it on Dynasty, and we'll check out the values of a couple guys. First up, I'm going to kick it right back to you, Dan, with Juwan Jennings, who seems to be, I mean, look, he was definitely, it felt like he was running ahead of Debo at least this past week, and he's made a name for himself this entire season as, the receivers have been dealing with injuries, just the whole thing, the whole strange situation we've had in San Francisco. So, as a resident 49ers fan, I'm going to kick it to you. But first, Juwan Jennings, he is actually the most traded player this week, overall, regardless of position. On Keep Trade Cut, he is the wide receiver 53. He is up 24 spots over the last month. So again, making a name for himself. It's certainly climbing the ranks, but that means he was all the way down there at wide receiver 77 at one point. Climbing from nothing, right? But still, Keep Trade Cut, wide receiver 54 on the ECR, wide receiver 19. So is this a guy who, if you're a contender, you're going out to go purchase at the cost of, get Najee and a third, pay Najee and a third, add a second for Brian Thomas. So Juwan Jennings plus a second for Brian Thomas, Theo Johnson and Jalen McMillan for Juwan Jennings, or a second straight up for Juwan Jennings. Walk me through, some of those examples, which of those you would make. And let me say real quick, it's one of, I've been doing this again every week this season, or pretty much, maybe not the episode that I missed, but this is potentially, when I was looking through some of the trades for Juwan Jennings, some of the most volatile in value that I think I've ever seen, with some players. I tried to condense it to the ones in like this type of range, but like you would see some for a first, some for a third. You saw like young rookies that are solid players. You saw, like random, like bad players. The value for Juwan Jennings is all over the place. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, I think that's because nobody knows how to value the guy right now, right? Because figure he's got a ticking clock. When Brandon Ayuk comes back from his ACL, probably about midway through next season, you expect his target share to go down. That's where he's been thriving. He's thrived when Ayuk has been out of the lineup, acting as that X receiver, acting as the team's man beater. But it has a clock on it. He's only signed through next year. Ricky Pearsall figures to be more a part of the offense heading into next season. Maybe Debo's gone and now keep him more relevant even when Ayuk comes back next season. But you really have a clock on how long Jauan Jennings, from a dynasty perspective, is going to continue to be able to give you value. I tell you right now, I do Jauan Jennings in a second for Brian Thomas in a friggin' heartbeat, because Brian Thomas looks absolutely fantastic, and they're going to get a new coaching staff in there. And he already has the chemistry with Trevor Lawrence. Najee in the third is tempting. If I need a running back right now, I think I might be able to pull that trigger. Najee's future does worry me a little bit, but if I get Najee in the third, I'm pulling the trigger there ultimately, because I do think Najee gets one more stint somewhere as a starting running back. And again, like I said, I think Jauan Jennings, I wouldn't do Theo Johnson, Jalen McMillan. I think I like Theo Johnson a lot for his future. A lot of flux for who the quarterback's going to be for the Giants. Do they move on from Brian Daboll? And Jalen McMillan, I think, is just a dude. He's just a dude. Now, what's interesting to me is that second-round draft pick. When I trade Jauan Jennings straight up for a second-round draft pick, that all comes down to your circumstances. If you're competing this year, obviously no. But if you're not, if I could get a second-round pick for a guy who wasn't even on most people's radars coming into this season, I'm probably pulling the trigger on that deal too, because again, there's a ticking clock for Jauan Jennings' value. So I like this, and you're right. Even in redraft leagues, I'm seeing all kinds of crazy trades for Jauan Jennings. Look, the fact is, right now, people are valuing him, myself included, especially for this week, as a top 12 wide receiver. He's a wide receiver one right now, and I think that's more of a remark on how bad the wide receiver group is at the moment, especially with 6 teams on bye, than it is anything else. But it is all over the place, because I think people are just now starting to catch up to the idea that Jauan Jennings, not Deebo Samuel, is the number one wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers right now. And I don't think that it's going to discontinue moving forward.
Kendrick Bourne, part 2.
On the other side of that, real quick, and we're going to move on to our next player. If you were a contender, would you buy Jauan Jennings for a second?
No, I'm not getting up my second round pick for Jauan Jennings. It had to be somebody bigger than that, with a better schedule than that the rest of the way, that I think is really going to help me win a championship. He's a solid player. Love to have him as a wide receiver too, but I don't think he's the missing piece. And that second round pick is going to be pretty valuable, especially this draft class coming up.
Yeah, no doubt. All right. Again, then moving on to our next player, and this will be a much maligned running back in Travis Etienne, who has dealt with some injuries this season and has dealt with a really strong backup showing in Tank Bigsby, who had an awful rookie year and then suddenly turned it around, and seems like every other time he touches the ball, he's pulling out an explosive. But Tank Bigsby has also dealt with some injuries, so Travis Etienne has become a little more interesting than he has been at other points of the season. So he is the 23rd most traded player, but 7th most traded at the running back position on Keep Trade Cut. He is our running back 29, which is definitely a fall from grace from where he was in the offseason. Let me tell you that. He's only down 5 spots this month because he's been falling pretty much every month for the last 3. Coming into this season as one of the top running backs in Dynasty and in redraft. He was an RB1, or largely drafted as an RB1 in redraft. ECR, obviously NA, they are on their bye, but going for trades, people have added a second onto Travis Etienne, so Etienne plus a second for Pacheco, for a second straight up, so Etienne for a second. I've seen the year on that second kind of vary pretty heavily. I've seen him go straight up for 2025. I've seen his go as late as a 2027 second. So that value can kind of fluctuate, because you can kind of call a 2027 second more equivalent to like a mid-third in present year, thereabouts. Dobbs and Levis, Romeo Dobbs and Will Levis for Travis Etienne. This was an interesting one and felt like an outlier, but I wanted to throw it out there anyways. Travis Etienne plus a first for Joe Burrow, and I double-checked her. That is a 2-quarterback league, so a wild one there. Don't think it makes a ton of sense. Another interesting one, but one that felt a little bit more in reality. But interesting, especially if you have both these players, and that's ETN and Bigsby. So give up the Jacksonville Jaguars backfield for 2025 first, which is an interesting proposition, especially if you've been playing the wrong running back week to week in that backfield. So Chris, are any of those tempting? If you traded for Travis Etienne or drafted Travis Etienne when he was a much higher value guy, are you getting out? Are you kind of riding the storm, as a lot of people predict this coaching staff, this regime kind of changes over, and maybe you can kind of catch him on the backside and hopefully you get a little bit more out of him later?
I think it depends on where I am, Adam. More than likely, unless I'm, a contender right now, if I'm a team that's going to try to rebuild or I don't think I'm going to quite win it this year, I'm going to move on from ETN. I don't think he's going to be the long-term future for the Jacksonville Jaguars. You talked about the coaching regime being changed. I think he's on the last year of his deal, I believe. Or might have one more year left on his deal. This is the guy could easily pigeonholed as a catch-only running back where maybe he starts getting taken out of the early down roles because of his pass-catching ability. Well, that kind of limit what he's able to do. So I look at different trades you talked about. The first rounder for both the backfield, I would pull in a heartbeat. This is going to be extremely deep draft class when it comes to running back position. There's going to be a lot of running backs that are going to be available to people, both in the NFL and in fantasy. So that's something I would like to get my opportunity to get in to find versus a guys that we kind of have role players. Type Bigsby's a guy who's only early down guy, doesn't involve in the passing and catching. And Travis Etienne, who might be kind of, if he moves on, might be stuck in that role as a Rashad White kind of guy where you can kind of, you like him, but isn't necessarily somebody you want to kind of build your roster around. So when you talk about most of those trades, the Joe Burrow one, of course, I would definitely pull that. But I think most of those, I would pull the deal. I think Etienne's a guy that, you kind of saw what he's going to be for most his upside in a sense. Now, if I'm a contender right now and I want to hold on to a younger running back, what I think is about a year or two, you might have a chance. It reminded me a lot of DeAndre Swift's situation in Detroit, where I think that he kind of, fell out of favor, got injured here or there, then goes to the Eagles, had an okay season. People forgot about him. Back on track, for Chicago, but is he somebody that you necessarily were loving to have, trading a second rounder or a first rounder for? Probably not. So I think that's a guy that you can kind of compare him to moving forward.
Sure, definitely makes sense. Swift is one who we talked about earlier in the season because he had a pretty wild swing, was a popular kind of buy candidate going into the season, dipped like crazy the first month of the season, then rocketed back up after a strong second month and beyond. So interesting comparison there. Can definitely see it, but also understand, just getting the draft capital now because, there's a lot of unknowns with him. One more player moving on to the quarterback position, a guy who I believe we've talked about already, but as the sample continues, I think the conversation has kind of stayed relevant because we've seen him a little bit more in his current spot. That's Jameis Winston with the Cleveland Browns. He is the fifth most traded player overall, most traded at the quarterback position. Keep trade cut, quarterback 32, up 8 spots in the last month. ECR, quarterback 21. So low end, but firmly, at least for now, a super flex consideration, a guy who is more than likely playing as that second quarterback in your super flex dynasties. And look, I don't think the value is anything that crazy. So I'm curious if you're a contender and you've had an injury as your second quarterback, or maybe they're just straight up underperforming. Maybe it's, a Caleb Williams, right, where he's still your guy for the future, but you don't necessarily want to be relying on him week to week right now. Are you giving up, for instance, a third for Jameis Winston, 2/3 for Jameis Winston, a second and a third for Jameis Winston, Ray Davis and Michael Wilson, Ray Davis straight up for Jameis Winston, and then it was plus Jameis Winston plus Michael Wilson for Njoku, or Jameis Winston straight up for Taysom Hill. Funny trade of the former Saints quarterback. So, Chase, what's your thought there? Is he someone who, if you're in need at that second quarterback position in Dynasty Superflex, are you throwing a little bit of capital towards Jameis Winston?
Yeah, all of my dynasty teams, I've said it before, I'll remind everybody, all of my dynasty teams are super flex. That's what I happen to play. So I'm always looking at backup quarterbacks and rostering as many of those as I can that I think are going to have value in the year. Winston's one of those guys that I do want on my roster in dynasty super flex, even past this season, because he's a backup who we know and we've seen in a fantasy standpoint put up bigger numbers than a lot of guys can if and when he does get his shot. I mean, it's a guy that as a starter, granted several years ago now, different team, but he as a starter, the guy threw for 5,000 some yards. He matched 30 touchdowns with 30 interceptions, but he can throw the ball all over the field. We know he can put up points from a fantasy standpoint. So I don't want to overpay to get him, but I'm also, if I do have him, and I do have him in a couple of leagues, I'm not giving him up unless someone else does overpay, because I think he's a sneaky valuable commodity in that super flex setting. So if I could get someone to, give me him for 1 or 2 third round picks, depending on where I'm sitting in the round or whatever, 1 or 2 third rounders, I'd do that in a heartbeat. I would trade him for a wide receiver straight up, say in like the Jerry Jeudy, Rashad Bateman, even Keenan Allen, like aging out kind of range right now. I would do him straight up for, say, like a Zach Charbonnet or Javonte Williams right now in a super flex position. If I'm trading him, if I'm the one who's selling him, I'm probably not taking less than a higher mid 2 for him. Because like I said, it's a super flex setting, and we know that this guy can have value as a starting quarterback in this league. Like you said, he's a quarterback 2, but he's still a starting quarterback 2 then in a super flex setting. So I'm going to make sure that somebody else gives me a lot of value before I just dump a commodity like that off in Dynasty.
And just to throw it out there, he's a quarterback 2, but he's a volatile one, and there's some down weeks with that for sure. What makes him interesting in your quarterback 2 slot is that most quarterbacks you're putting in that slot don't have the potential to go for 30. He does, which is an interesting commodity at that price point. Go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, I wish Jameis could be like the guaranteed holdover quarterback for the next 5 years for franchises. Instead of having to watch like Gardner Minshew's and different guys like that. I want him to be that guy.
No, definitely agreed. But all right, look, that's a guy. I'm with you, Chase. I want him on my team, and I'm only selling him if he's overvalued or maybe in a rebuild. But regardless, I'm with you. But hey, let's kick it right back into the present day with our gambling.
All right, well, it's time to cash some tickets, and we did pretty good last week. Got 2 of 3. Would have been 3 of 3 had the early Nico Collins catch not been called back to the penalty, but still did pretty good anyway. All right, so this week, I'm loving Mike Evans coming back. He's got 53.5 yards. I like the over. The expectation coming back from his recovered hamstring is underway. He was a limited participant in practice today. He should be good to go. And look, besides the Panthers, the Giants have allowed an opposing wide receiver over 53.5 yards in every single game this season. Let's be frank. That was just the Panthers. So they're letting up all these yards to the opposing wide receivers. Evans should be able to come back to a heavy target share this week. So I like him over the 53.5 yard mark. Kyron Williams, I like him over 15.5 receiving yards this week. The Eagles have been tough to run on, but they are allowing running backs to have success through the air. They've allowed the 10th most targets to the running back position and the 13th most receiving yards to the running back position. Outside of last week, Kyron Williams on a little bit of a roll where he's been over this mark 3 of the last 4 games. Guess what? I expect Kyron Williams to be able to get a few more catches this week. They've been imposing the Eagles defense against perimeter wide receivers, so the check down might be something Stafford has to go to. So I like 15.5 for Kyron there. Last but not least, we have Rachaad White. I got him over 20.5 receiving yards this upcoming week. Look, everybody could do anything they want to against the Carolina Panthers, and I'm not going to roll anybody out. I'm certainly not going to bet the unders on anybody when it comes to playing the Carolina Panthers, especially. But he's really been over that 3 of the last 4 games. And also, the Bucs have turned this back into a 2-man rotation. Okay, Rashawn Tucker finally went back to being relevant. It's now Bucky Irving, Rachaad White being mostly the passing down guy. And this week, the Giants, yes, they get the Carolina Panthers next week. But the Giants have allowed this 11th most receiving yards this season to the running backs and the 12th most targets to running backs. So yes, the Rachaad White over 20.5 receiving yards against the Giants this week. And that is your player prop bets of the week.
And I'll crush you like a paper cup.
So now we get to the segment everyone's been waiting for. They want to know who our must starts, who our must sits are, crushes and our busts. Before we do that, though, we do have a question coming in from Jacob. He wants to know, because this is a star sit question anyway, Bucky Irving, that is, Tony Pollard or Javonte Williams as a flex this week. Adam, what do you got?
Oh, that's tough. I think I want to lean towards Pollard. Look, I would love to go with Irving here. I just don't quite have the cojones to do it. Look, it's a tough matchup. It's just kind of tough projecting the splits in that backfield week to week. So if you're looking for a little bit more upside, Irving could be your guy. I'm not going to deny that because that's a fantastic matchup. I would love to get into it, but I just, again, kind of thinking about the splits of workload, that's where I would want to lean.
I have Bucky Irving slightly ahead right now. Now, a lot of this is going to have to do with Tajay Spears available, because remember, he's coming back from concussion. He had practice limited capacity today. If he can't go, I will be moving Pollard ahead of Bucky Irving, because then he'll get the full-on work share. So that's going to depend on for me. But I do like, as of now, assuming Spears plays, I like the matchup for Bucky Irving more. Javonte thing, look, it could be Aldrich Estime this week for all we freaking know. And so I'm not trusting that any shape, way, or form. Wendy came in with a question. I have a trade offer of McConkey for my Najee. He needs a running back. I have David Montgomery, I have Kenneth Walker, a couple of scrubs on my bench, but I could use a wide receiver. Chris, would you do this deal?
I was skeptical of the deal until I saw that Wendy is starting Keyshawn Butte right now. So I would actually pull that trigger, because I think McConkey, especially with the matchup versus the Ravens this week, is an advantageous matchup to have. I would pull the trigger for Najee. I like to have their RB depth, but I think you need to upgrade that receiver for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, also, I'm sorry, Wendy, get a hold of me. I still got your signed Deontay Johnson jersey from the Expo to give you. So get a hold of me.
Is that the same Wendy?
Oh, yeah. That's Wendy Early.
Wendy. We're trying to give stuff to you.
That's our girl.
We're trying to get stuff to you. We got to send us in the message in there. Yeah, Chris, I had the same thought you did originally, which is I don't want anybody else to have running back depth. But yeah, when you're that desperate at wide receiver, you gotta do it. All right, one last question till we get to Adam for his crush here from Darren. Disley, Andrews, or Tucker Kraft at tight end this week? Disley's been on a tear lately. Chase, what do you think?
Tough there, because it's Mark Andrews. Is always going to be Mark Andrews, but he just seems so volatile this season. Tucker Kraft has been really good, but he's facing a San Francisco team that has been really, really tough against opposing tight ends. And then we've got Will Disley out there, who has kind of just been sneakily scoring points on us. I think I'm going to lean towards Mark Andrews, just because I know that it's Mark Andrews, and in any given week he can pop off. But yeah, it's weirdly, it's a lot closer question than it would have seemed before the season.
I do agree it's a lot closer. I do have Mark Andrews, my ranked 9 tight end this week, so I have him ahead of the group. The biggest thing that came down for me is Isaiah Likely being back is annoying, but
yes,
the mismatch against the Chargers is a tight end. It's not going to be the wide receivers this week. Yeah. I do think Andrews has the best chance of that group for a touchdown. I know, disrespect to Will Disley, but I'm sorry, it ain't the guy who I'm going to be leaning on for this week. We know that'll come back down the earth. We've seen stretches like that before. Okay, Luke, hang on to your question. We'll get to you in a minute. Adam, I want to get to you. Who's your crush of the week, Adam?
Yeah, my crush this week is Austin Eckler. Kind of a similar vibe to the DFS segment earlier. I'm just trying to get into that matchup any way I can. And I think Austin Eckler being the ECR running back 26 is the spot for me to do it, at least against the ECR. Look, he combines, having an awesome rushing matchup with that receiving floor, especially in half point and full point PPR. Look, he's only had 2 games this season with 10 plus carries. I get that, but he scored very well in both of those games. And look, he doesn't need a ton of carries to feel pretty good about it. One of the good things this season relative to last is with the shortened workload, he has looked a lot better. He has looked a little bit more explosive. And the biggest thing is he gets a lot more red zone looks than you'd expect. Now, I want to throw it out here before I mention these numbers that obviously Brian Robinson Jr. has missed some time, so this is it's closer than it actually is, but it's still closer than you would expect, even accounting for that. And that Austin Eckler has 20 red zone rushing attempts on the season, and Brian Robinson does at 27. Again, missed a couple games from Brian Robinson, but for a guy who's averaging less than 10 attempts a game to have 20 of them be in the red zone, I mean, they're trying to use Austin Eckler as the smaller guy in the red zone at least a couple times a game. And this is a team who they're at, or at least when I looked, their over-under team total was at 28, right? So 3 touchdowns and a couple field goals or 4 touchdowns. So we're having some opportunities playing the numbers. I think he's got a solid chance to get the end zone, which is good for fantasy value. He could easily break a reception. I think to me, I don't think it's crazy off of ECR, but I consider him much more of a low to mid-end RB2 than I do a high-end RB3, making him technically a must-start as an RB2.
You saw a lot of the pony backfield last week out of Washington, too, where they're utilizing both those guys.
Yeah, look, synopsis, what Adam just said, do you have a running back? Are they playing Dallas? Then play him. I mean, that's pretty much what it boils down to right now, essentially. Luke came in back with another question, another tight end question, another one surrounding Will Dissly. Who would you start at Dissly, Tucker Kraft, or Laporta? Chris, what would you do there?
I will go with Sam Laporta on that one. I know that's the guy coming back from injury, but I think right now Detroit's showing you they're trying to get all their playmakers involved as much as possible. Whenever those guys are healthy, they come back, they get touchdowns almost automatically. I'm going to talk about Will Dissly a little bit later, so that's where I'm going to stick with Laporta right there of those 3 guys.
And Luke asking, does Jayden Daniels stay in the whole game against Dallas? That's what he's worried about. He's stayed in the whole game since he's been hurt, so I'm not worried about it any more so than I would be any other week against Dallas here. Okay, Chris, talking to you. Crush, what do you got?
Well, we guys talked about some of these guys earlier, so I'm going to kind of cheat, Dan, and I'm going to say Tampa Bay backfield in general. I love both the backs, Rashad White and Bucky Irving, and ECR is in both the mid-20s, or I mean 22, 23, I think it was. I think both of those guys are must-starts, and Baker Mayfield at number 10. Baker Mayfield is going to light it up if he gets Mike Evans back this week. You're going to see touchdowns galore versus that Giants defense. I love Baker as a play as well. I have a crush on the Bay backfield.
Yeah, hard to argue there. I actually have both inside my top 20 this week, so I'm right in line with you. Chase, who you crushing on this week, big guy?
I brought him up earlier. I was sad I couldn't trade for him in that question, but Jackson Smith-Njigba was my crush this week. He's been on a tear the last month or so. His last 3 games, he's got over 30 targets. He's seen red zone targets in that offense, which we didn't necessarily expect from him. And as you actually, Dan, alluded to, in your observations over at FantasySportsAdviceNetwork.com, he looks to have finally eclipsed Lockett as an option in that pass-heavy offense there. He's running out of the slot. The Cardinals give up the 6th most fantasy points in the league to opposing running backs out of the slot. They give up the 12th most points overall to wide receivers. This should be a close game shootout, I think. So JSN is a top 16 play for me this week, even though he's ranked around 1920 ECR right now. He's a top 16 for me. I love Jackson Smith-Njigba. Fire him up.
Yeah, that plays into my guy, who I love this week a lot more than ECR does. So Marvin Harrison, wide receiver 22 on ECR. I got my wide receiver 11 this week. He's had a few weeks where he has cracked the top 12. I expect this to be one of those weeks as well. We've seen his target share kind of tick up to 24% over the last 4 games, which is kind of that solid high-end wide receiver 2 territory, and it depends on your efficiency and productivity. And Seattle's giving up the 12th most fantasy points to wide receivers, especially over the last 4 games. They've allowed either a touchdown or a 100-yard performance to an opposing wide receiver. We saw Juwan Jennings just have a strong game against them. It's one of the few defenses where you can leave a perimeter wide receiver out there isolated, never move him around, and he can still have a good game because you can attack those corners out there. So that plays right into what the Cardinals are doing with Marvin Harrison right now. 2 middling defenses could be, Chase, to your point, a mini little shootout here. The 4th highest game over under total of the week. So Marvin Harrison, I think, cracks the top 12 and must be a play for you this week. All right, as we go into, we had another Dominic, I'm going to stop you right there. I've been leading the charge. Jalen Waddle must sit no matter what your option is. So, yes, I will sit Jalen Waddle and go with Xavier Legette. That's how bad it's gotten. I'm going to start a Carolina wide receiver over Jalen Waddle. All right, so we got to switch gears. Go or bust. Talk about the guys that we're either outright sitting or not having as high expectations for this week. And now I was about to poo-poo on one of my answers I gave to the viewers a little bit earlier. But Adam, what's your bust here for the week?
Yeah, I hate to say it, but it is Mark Andrews. Look, he's been a guy who we've seen him twice this season, even in full point PPR. We talk half point PPR on this show typically. But even in full point PPR, without a receiving touchdown, he's reached double digits twice this season. Look, I don't know if you guys know this. The Chargers have not given up a receiving touchdown to a tight end. They've given up a ton of yards. They have hemorrhaged yards at the position. They have not given up a receiving touchdown to the position. Once we get into the red zone, they are clamping down to the tight end position. And this is not a team that has had the easiest tight end schedule in the world either. They have had matchups against Bowers, Kelsey, McBride, Njoku, Taysom Hill. And look, I understand that throwing McBride in there, sure, doesn't count. He can't get in the end zone regardless, it seems. So maybe that one doesn't matter. We can throw that one to the side. But he's a talented tight end, right? And these, again, are guys who have gotten yards against them. In PPR, these guys have been useful. I'm just curious how much Mark Andrews is the guy outside of the red zone to where I can trust him as a starter. So for me personally, I'm preferring to play guys like Ertz, who is the ECR tight end 14, Laporta, who is the ECR tight end 16, and even Cole Kmet with an interesting matchup against Minnesota at the tight end 18 over Mark Andrews. That one could more of a toss-up than a straight-up, but definitely the first two I would much rather have than Mark Andrews, just given how the Chargers have played in the red zone.
Oh, man. Look, Ertz I can give you because I have Andrews only one spot ahead of Ertz. So I kind of have them going back and forth. So I can get up before in that. But man, Laporte he doesn't get targeted. He's a Jalen Waddle of tight ends right now. He's not part of the offense. That's tough. I can't fully disagree though that Andrews, just like every other back end tight end one, is going to be extremely hit or miss this upcoming week. Chris, who's your bust this week?
Speaking of hit or miss, this is a guy that came up in a lot of our questions, and that's Will Dissly. Look, Will Dissly had his first touchdown of the season last week. Number one, only one of the season. His second game over 80 yards. He's had 2 games over 80 yards. Previous all other games, high was 41 yards, which you usually get from Will Dissly is about 3 to 5 catches and about 20 to 40 yards. For ECR's tight end 7, no thank you. I know the Ravens, everybody gets excited about playing the Ravens. Did a pretty good job about Pat Freiermuth last week. I think he had 2 catches for 14 yards, I believe. Will Dissly is going to be closer to that than he is from last week. Will Dissly is not a guy that I'm excited to have in my lineup, and I would advise you not to have in yours.
Chris is poo-pooing on what is right now the hot.
And I liked Will Dissly. Dan knows this. He crapped on about Will Dissly earlier in the year about Will Dissly and Dynasty, but there's no way I can sit there and vouch for a guy who had 1 touchdown for the first time last week.
Yeah, and it's not like Justin Herbert just started throwing the ball. He's been throwing the ball pretty well for the past couple of weeks. So,
and it's versus Cincinnati. Everybody gets touchdowns versus Cincinnati as a tight end position.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. The Will Dissly train's gotten a little too out of his skis. We have a question coming in here. Jacob, Love or Daniels this week? Jacob, it's Daniels regardless because he's playing Dallas this week. Here's what I will say. Love right now is my QB 14. If we find out Nick Bosa is not playing in this game because he's dealing with the two obliques. Jordan Love will get into my top 10 this week. So that's going to have a big difference as far as what the value is. Could be a lot closer, but regardless, it's Daniels. I'm not passing up the matchup against Dallas. I think he gets running again this particular week. So with that, we pivot over to Chase, who is your bust of the week.
Bust this week is going to be Chuba Hubbard. He's been a great story this season on an otherwise abysmal Carolina offense, but he's going up against Kansas City Chiefs this week. And we kind of alluded to it earlier, but as if the Chiefs aren't going to be motivated enough and angry enough coming off their first loss of the season to the Bills they're also giving up the fewest points to opposing fantasy running backs. And oh yeah, Dave Canales came out this week now, and he said he fully expects Jonathan Brooks to finally make his debut in week 12 here, coming off that knee injury and coming off the Panthers bye as well. Listen, Hubbard has raked the last couple of weeks against the Saints and the Giants, but he's not getting, a buck and a half on the ground here against the Kansas City Chiefs like he did last week in Germany last time he was out against Germany against the Giants. But when he doesn't get in the end zone, his scoring's been pretty pedestrian for the most part this weekend. We're going to have to watch the usage pattern really, for the next couple of weeks here in the Carolina backfield to see how they're deploying Hubbard versus Brooks. Again, I don't expect them to dump the whole load on Brooks, no matter how high of draft pick he was. He just stepped out of the blue tent. But Chuba Hubbard's a running back 11 on the year. He's outside my top 20 this week. There's just too much stacked against him here between Brooks coming back, the fact that it's the Chiefs defense. I don't want to have to be relying on Chuba Hubbard if that's who you've been relying on this season.
I agree the Chiefs defense is a bad rap, but I have a hard time believing his first week back making his NFL debut, he's going to have much more of a role than Miles Sanders would have. And Miles Sanders is going to be out this week. It's hard for me to see it from that standpoint, but I am with you. I do have him outside my top 20, still in my top 24 though this week, just because of the volume I expect him to still get. Remember, they just paid.
He's a low end RB2 this week, matchup alone, regardless of whether Brooks is playing or not. Yeah.
I agree with that. Okay. So my bust this week, near and dear to my heart, not only is he on my favorite team, but I actually own him in quite a few places. And I just had to look myself in the face and say, you know what? I just have to have lower expectations for you. You might not have a better option this week because there's 6 teams on bye. So you may still have to play this guy. And if it wasn't for 6 teams being on bye, he'd be ranked as a wide receiver 3. As it is, though, Deebo Samuel, who's the ECR wide receiver 15 right now, is my wide receiver 24. He's on the decline, guys. He's only averaging 2.6 yards of separation. That's a full yard less than his worst mark at any other point in his career. And right now, the way Kyle Shanahan's been scheming up the team, it's not helping matters. He's been the second worst yards after catch over expected in his career since his rookie season. He's only had 1 receiving touchdown in the year, only 2 total touchdowns this season. They're struggling in the red zone as a team. They can't get anything going. That's usually where he makes his heyday. He makes his heyday on motion and mismatches and created, yak opportunities. None of that is coming to fruition right now out of Kyle Shanahan, who has a different excuse every single week as to why that's even the case. The Packers have only allowed the 10th least fantasy points to the wide receivers. And look, they play a heavy zone scheme. So if there's ever going to be a chance for Deebo to maybe do something, it's when he plays against zone. But even we've seen zone-heavy teams approach the 49ers with man concepts. I don't know if the Packers are going to be the exception. I don't know if they just stick to what they do. But this is pretty much going to be a last-ditch opportunity for Deebo to not just be a wide receiver 3 in my book for the rest of the season. Jalen Alexander's not expected to play, so between that and the scheme, he might be able to get some headway. But if it's not this week, I don't think we're looking at Deebo Samuel as more than a wide receiver 3 the rest of the year. And for this week, I have lower expectations, and he's only in my top 24 because of the 6 teams on bye. That wraps it up for the show, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it. We'll be back tomorrow with Dr. Brian Scott to talk about some of the injuries coming up in Week 12. Make sure you tune in on Fantasy Football Advice Network, subscribe on our YouTube channel, and download Operation Domination Football on all of your favorite podcast apps so you can listen to us while you're on the go. Until then, guys, good luck. We'll talk to you. Hey there. I want to thank you for watching Operation Domination today. And if you're enjoying the show, there are some ways you can help support us. You can go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination and leave us a 5-star review. And you can do this on any podcast platform or on our YouTube page when you go to @FF Advice Network. This completely helps out the show be able to grow, and also leave us comments to let us know how we can curtail the show to you, because you are the most important member of the show. So again, go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination to leave a 5-star review and leave a comment wherever you listen or watch the show, and we'll help better serve you.
Post show, as always,